let's take a look at the particle system in Blender. We'll be focusing on the hair system in particular, as we need it to create textures for our haircuts. Probably you could use some photos or paint textures by hand in software like Photoshop. I think that was the way a couple of years ago, but now we can utilize great tools like Blender or XGen, which will give us better output maps for creating natural looking hair in real-time engines. For your convenience, I split videos in two parts. First, we'll have my voiceover and explanations of particular tools, techniques, and workflows. The second will be a time-lapse of me creating hair strands for the baking. Let's start by taking a look at the tools. Create a simple plane and go to particle settings, click on the plus icon and switch mode to hair. In the Mission tab, the number is responsible for the number of controllable hair particles generated on the surface. I personally like to keep it at 0 and add curves manually, as it gives me more control over the final look. Empty spaces between curves will be later filled by the children. We'll move to them a little bit later. See that changes the way how hair particles are generated. It doesn't really mean anything to me, as I'm adding them manually, so I skip this setting. Hair length. Here's the part in which we have to decide on the length of the hair we want to make. You can manipulate them later on using the particle edit mode, but it's really uncomfortable. Segments decides on the resolution of the hair, and hair dynamics and rudder don't really do anything for us because we do not create any simulations and not doing any renders in Blender. In viewport, it's important to change the strand steps to the maximum number to get the highest quality of our hair strings. Children tab is probably the most important tab for us. Children are hair strings created around controllable curves we created either by hand or by changing the number value in the Mission tab. Thanks to that, we can control more particles using fewer curves. It speeds up the pipeline and creates a better, more natural look. There are two ways of creating children. First, simple. Basically creates particles around the main curves. You can change the amount of them, length, a threshold that determines how many of them are affected by the setting, and size and radius of the area that's being covered by the particles. Interpolate, on the other hand, creates children on the entire surface and interpolates the influence of particular curves. The next really important tab is clamping. Clamping, as you may remember from the hair theory, is one of the most important things if it comes to the hair behavior. Here you can clamp children to the parents. The more parents you have, the more clamps you'll get. And by parents, I mean those controllable curves you created before. You can also change here the shape and twist of the clamps. Roughness will give us a nice variety and randomization in the hair strings. Uniform deforms entire clamps. You can change the size of the noise that's being applied to the deformation. Random, on the other hand, deforms each string. Here, as well as in the length setting, you can change the threshold to make fewer strings affected by the roughness. In the Kings tab, you can choose what kinks are being applied to the hair, but I'm not really a fan of them. I'd rather do everything by hand. And that's all particle settings that interest us for texture creation. Let's talk about the particle edit mode. Here we can add one or more plans with one click. Change the steps and control keys, which are those handles that control the curves. And the comb is used for controlling the particles. I don't really like to use it as it is, that's why I changed the preview mode in the upper left corner to points. It gives me more control and makes editing more predictable. Another tool I sometimes use is length, which may create hair shorter or longer as you want, as you need in your case. I haven't been in need to use any other tool, actually. Maybe cut from time to time, but really exceptionally. Now we can move to actually create the particle strands. I like to plan my textures like this. The first 2 or 3 are really thick and do not pass almost any light through them, so you cannot see the back screen. First one should be the thickest and serve as a base. Another 2 or 3 should be the breakup hair. A little bit thinner will serve us to break structure and make the flow more believable. Thanks to them, we'll also get this nice depth in the hair mesh. Last will serve us as flyaways or detail hairs. As the name says, they will be those random single strings that fly on the head in random directions. I have a couple more hair strands, typical for the hairstyle I want to create. Like those on the side, they will be the hair that falls into the braids right here. And those on the top will serve me as the baby hair and transitional hair, which are those really thin, mostly shorter right before your hairline starts. Okay, so when we already planned what hairstyle we want to create and what type of textures we need, we can start creating the particles. Make a plane and give it a little bit of curvature. You don't have to, but I find that it will give you the most natural look around the root area. I simply split the plane with one edge, pull it a little into the camera, and with Ctrl+B create a bevel. With scroll, you can set the resolution of the bevel, try to make it as smooth as you can. You don't really have to curve it as much, the same rotation would be enough, but I like how roots look this way. At this step, I like to set up my camera. It'll determine how your UV layout will look like. So take your camera, move it in front of the hair particles, set the type to orthographic. Now you'll place all your hair strands in the camera view. Thanks to that, you'll be able to preview how the final result will look like. I start placing my curves with the Add tool in the particle edit. I set the count to 1 in order to place only one curve at a time. Also, I set the keys to 7 because the hair I want to create is quite long, so I want to have more handles to control them. With the comp tool, I straighten it up and play with the curvature. As you remember, the first hair strand should be the thickest one. That's why I add a lot of curves and try to fill the entire space. I try to replicate the natural behavior of the hair in the texture. That's why I create some clumping, not only in the children tab, but also in the flow of the curves. So after you place your curves, take some of them and make a clamp connecting strings at their tips. In contrast to the breakup or flyaways, I like to keep the base quite straight, so it will fill the entire haircut quite evenly. Because of that, don't overdo the clamping. You can preview the look of the hair by checking the children button in the particle mode. This is where you can see how curves influence the children in real time. I play with the children settings. You can experiment with simple or interpolated looks. For some strands, simple looks better, for other, interpolated is the way to go. Go to clamping, change the value to 1 and vary it with roughness and threshold. Play with the roughness, but make sure that you control randomization with the threshold. Some of the strings should still meet at the end of the clamp. Otherwise, it will look like bird or fur. I like to create a colored plane in the background to keep an eye on the hairstrand density. If the hairstrand is too thin, add more strings with the display amount slider. It will make it denser. Once I'm happy with the look, I copy-paste the plane, delete the particle system and create a new one. Unfortunately, you cannot control copied systems separately. That's why it's necessary to create a new one if you want to change some settings. Generally, I do the same thing for every next trend, but reducing the number of strings every time. Make sure to give some variety in each of the strands, make them a little bit different every time to avoid redundancy. Once you finish making strands, you can move to preparing the baking in XNormal for XNormal.